Welcome, and thank you for participating in the ANA Merit Review training on writing effective comments. This training will focus on helping you to understand the components of a good comment, how to apply analysis when writing comments, identifying tips and tricks for fixing common mistakes that we see, and ensuring that your score aligns with the strengths and weaknesses you've identified. Writing effective comments is important. And the reason we emphasize this is because your review and analysis is used to provide the applicants with critical feedback. This feedback is useful to your chairperson for compiling the PSRs, to ANA for making award decisions, as well as to unsuccessful applicants who will make revisions to their application for a more competitive proposal in a future funding cycle. Before we get started, it's important to remind you that you can only review and provide analysis on the information found within the application. Do not use external sources, links, or websites when evaluating an application. So let's begin with a discussion on preparation. First, you are expected to draft one comment on each and every subcriterion element listed in the NOFO for the panel you are assigned to. To be sure that you do not miss an element or comment, and to help you avoid repeating yourself or having conflicting statements, we recommend that you create a rubric like the one shown here. In the first column, you can list all of the subcriterion elements. Simply copy and paste them verbatim from the NOFO to the rubric. This will not replace the NOFO, which you should always have on hand. But it will make it easier to keep your comments in order while you reference other sections of the NOFO or make use of the resources within. We especially recommend you keep your NOFO open to Step 3, where ANA has provided more information on what must be included when applicants address each subcriterion element. While the review criteria may sound vague, Step 3 defines each in more detail. In the second column, you will enter at least one comment per element. These comments could be a strength or a weakness. Some people prefer to split these into two columns. If that's easier for you to keep track, then go for it. Whatever you find most effective is the best method to use. The last column should be reserved for your score. Do not score the subcriteria until you know how many strengths and weaknesses you have drafted. This rubric also has the added benefit of making it easier to spell check your writing first, then copy and paste your comments into the ARM system. Just be aware that when you copy and paste some special characters, they may be saved as hashtag symbols that you might need to delete before retyping the special character. The next thing to be aware of is how to read the NOFO criteria. Keep in mind that there are 3 criteria sections identified by a header and a max score possible. This is followed by a description of what you should keep in mind while reviewing that section. Be aware that all responses to the elements must be clear, logical, and detailed as stated in these paragraphs. An applicant must include the information outlined in Step 3 of the NOFO. If you are only looking at the listing of subcriterion elements, then you are not going to be able to provide a complete analysis of the application. So do be sure to read through Step 3 and each criteria's descriptive paragraph. This section goes on to outline the subcriteria, which are listed with their subcriterion score range, and then the associated elements, which are numbered sequentially. The SEDS NOFO has 21 subcriterion elements, which means you will need to draft at least 21 well-written comments. When reviewing each application using the NOFO criteria, do not simply check off that the application has something. You must ask if the application addressed each element well. That is, was it clear, logical, and detailed? Did it give the information asked for in Step 3 of the NOFO? If the answer is yes, the application responded to the element well, then it is a strength and requires you to explain why the application did well. If the answer is no, the application didn't respond very well, then it is a weakness, and you are required to explain why it wasn't thorough or clear enough to earn points. Regardless of whether you are writing a strength comment or a weakness comment, you must include 3 things. First, your comment must identify the element you are referring to. Do not repeat the entire element. Just touch briefly on a key word or phrase so that it's clear which element you are addressing. Second, provide a specific example to support the strength or weakness. Again, you do not need to copy and paste directly from the application. Simply summarize a data point or piece of evidence that justifies the comment. And third, provide analysis. Use words like clearly, satisfactorily, inadequate, or insufficient to describe how well the application responded to the NOFO. And tie up loose ends by explaining the reason why something was a strength or weakness. If you do not have all 3 of these components in every comment, then your review will be returned to you for revisions. Let's look over some additional tips and tricks. A good comment relates to just one specific element rather than touching on 2 or more in a single paragraph. A good comment summarizes an example from the narrative rather than listing items verbatim or copy-pasting direct quotes. It should also provide that very important analysis of why it was strong or weak rather than simply checking off the box to say something was there or not. Be sure you use the term application rather than applicant to avoid pointing fingers at any one particular person. And keep your comments to a short paragraph of 3 to 4 sentences. You do not need to write a dissertation, but you should avoid writing just one sentence. Be sure to avoid contradicting statements between strengths and weaknesses. If you said something was weak because it was missing, it should not be considered a strength somewhere else. And along those lines, you can only reference a single weakness once. Avoid double dinging them for a weakness under more than one subcriterion element. And finally, be sure that your review is comprehensive, uses complete sentences, good grammar, and is objective. Avoid commenting in ways that are subjective, opinionated, or offensive. Do not make suggestions for improvement. And do not make assumptions. If the application is missing information required by the review criteria, you must make it a weakness. Now that you understand what a well-written comment includes, let's look at some poorly drafted comments and find out how to fix them. The first comment is in reference to element number 1, which asks you if the application identified one current community condition to be addressed by the project, and did it well. Go ahead and add "and did it well" to the end of every element. After reviewing an application, this panelist wrote that there was a strength on page 11. They said, "The applicant provided the project's current community condition. This demonstrates that have fulfilled the NOFO subcriterion element." What's wrong with this comment? Well, unfortunately, there is no example. There is no analysis to determine how much of a strength this is. They use the term applicant instead of application, and there are some grammatical issues. Here is a better comment. The application clearly described the current community condition using baseline data, stating that 38% of high school students drop out on average each year. The application effectively supported this statement with additional local and regional data on truancy rates, grade point averages, and social interaction levels. This data illustrates why dropout rates are so high in the community and why it was identified as the condition to be addressed by this project. The terminology has changed. There are words of analysis used throughout, and there are specific examples to support this review. Here is a breakdown of why this was a good comment. First, it identified the element by touching on key words like current community condition. Second, it summarizes specific examples about the dropout rates of the students. And third, it provides an analysis on why it was a strength. Let's try another. Remember objectives? ANA wants an objective to have a timeline, a statement on what will be completed, or in other words, changed, and a measure of how much change will occur. This is found in step 3 of the NOFO, which you must be referencing to fully understand the elements. So a well-drafted objective might say something like, at the end of 24 months, graduation rates will increase among at-risk juniors in our high school who have shown patterns of truancy by 15%, or roughly an additional 20 students graduating each year. It has a timeline of 24 months, a change of increased graduation rates, and a measure of 15% or 20 students to gauge how much change will occur. Keep this in mind as we consider the next example. The application being reviewed said, by 12 months, we will reduce truant and other at-risk behavior. The panelists then considered element number 3, which asks if the application identified no more than 3 project objectives that describe a measurable achievement relevant to the project goal within a given time frame, and did it well. The panelist responds by saying this is a weakness because objective 1 does not meet the components required by the NOFO, seems vague, and there's no change. The trouble is, this statement has no analysis, no example, sounds like a subjective statement, and is only 1 sentence in length. A better way to respond to element 3 is, objective 1 does not fully meet the components required by the NOFO. There is no measurable achievement provided that sufficiently describes how much of a reduction of truant behavior will occur, without which it is unclear when the objective will be considered successfully completed. Here you can see there are several words of analysis, as well as a specific example. So why was this a well-written comment? First, it identified the element by referring to the objective. Second, it referenced an example. Keep in mind that you must provide examples to support your analysis, even if something is missing. Use an example of what is there, like the mention of reducing truant behavior, and then explain why this little bit of information is not enough to earn points. In this example, the panelists provided the analysis that there isn't enough information to understand how truant behavior will be measured, nor when the objective will be considered successful. So again, provide an example of what is there, and then explain why it is weak or insufficient to earn points. Let's look at one more example for element number 17, on how well the application addressed partners in supporting roles. The panelist wrote a strength statement that says, the application only identifies a partnership with a local school who will work with the project director. It goes on to describe just one part of their financial oversight plan. However, this statement addresses 2 different elements, number 17 as well as 18. There is no clear terminology or analysis to understand if these are strengths or weaknesses, and there is no example supporting either element. Instead, the panelist needs to split this into 2 separate comments. The first is for element 17, which now says, the application presented a detailed description of the one partner and the intended role. The application makes it clear that the project is relying on the high school to provide referrals of at-risk youth to the project director, as well as classroom space and one facilitator for the after-school portion of the project. This information provides an understanding of how this partner will contribute to the project activities. While element 18 on financial oversight is now a weakness, which says, the application does not detail a complete financial oversight plan. The single sentence stating the organization's intent to follow GAAP is not sufficient to fully understand the internal controls that will be in place to ensure sound management practices. Without a discussion on the identified key financial personnel, their qualifications, and the procedures they will follow, it is difficult to determine if a plan for proper oversight is in place. Looking at each of these a bit closer, we see the strength comment identifies the element. provides examples about the high school referrals and classroom space, and wraps up the comment with analysis to tie up loose ends. The weakness comment also touches on the element, provides an example of what does exist in the application, and then goes on to explain why just that little bit of information wasn't sufficient to earn points within the analysis. Here's another tip to keep in mind when providing an example for your weakness comments and then explaining why that example wasn't strong enough to earn full points. You must ensure that your weakness comments sound like weaknesses. To do this, you should avoid terms like but or however. When you say, they have this thing, but it's not sufficient, it sounds a lot like, the application has a strength, but surprise, it's a weakness. Here is an example from earlier. The application only states that they will follow GAAP, but they do not explain any other financial oversight plans. This kind of statement sounds passive and contradictory. A better way is to be straightforward and simply say, what they have is not sufficient, and avoid using but altogether. This sounds a lot more like a weakness statement. Here's a revised example. The single sentence stating the organization's intent to follow GAAP is not sufficient to fully understand the internal controls that will be in place to ensure sound management practices. Once you've written all of your comments, you can consider the score. One of the first tasks you and your panel should do is discuss the NOFO criteria and score ranges together while you're on your panel introductory call. Ask yourselves if there are subcriterion elements that should weigh more than others, or maybe have more than one focus. An example of this can be seen in the community-based strategies section that is worth up to 12 points. There are only 2 subcriterion elements, but each have 2 required parts to them. How will your panel score each part? And how will they divvy up the full 12 points if any piece is missing in the application? Next, be sure you stick to those ground rules across every application. You should not deduct 5 points from one application and only 2 points from another for the same mistake. You'll also want to be aware of any bias you have, and avoid scoring lower simply because the application presents information in a different or frustrating way. If the application has done something well in a clear, logical, and detailed manner, regardless of where you find it or if it is grammatically correct, then you must score them appropriately. On the other hand, do not score something more leniently just because you feel bad for the applicant. If the information presented is not clear, logical, and detailed, score them using the full range of points allowed, even if it's 0. Your method of scoring should be standardized and avoid comparing and contrasting applications against one another. Finally, keep in mind that your score should reflect the balance of strength and weakness comments. If you have no strengths in one section, then that section earns 0 points. On the other hand, if you have no weaknesses in one section, then that section must earn full points. A single point score is based on the weight of the criterion, the number of strength and weakness comments, and most importantly, how well the application addressed each element rather than simply awarding points because they have something. Be sure to consider all 3 when drafting comments and submitting scores. If you have any questions about what was presented here, please do not hesitate to reach out. ANA is here to help. And thank you for participating in this merit review process. We cannot do what we do without you.